Imagine you're cruising at 39,000 feet. The cabin's dark, mostly everyone's asleep. The only sound is that steady, powerful, reassuring hum of the jet engines right outside your window. And then, without any warning, dead silence. The heartbeat of this massive commercial jet, it just stops. Literally nothing but the haunting rush of wind against the fuselage. Welcome to our explainer. Today we're unpacking the jaw-dropping, terrifying, and absolutely triumphant true story of Air Transat Flight 236. We're going to break down exactly how a routine transatlantic flight turned into one of the most incredible feats of airmanship in modern history, and how a cascade of tiny, seemingly invisible errors almost cost hundreds of people their lives.
So you gotta wonder, how exactly does a 200-ton commercial airplane survive with no engines? An Airbus A330 is an absolute engineering marvel, but without thrust? It's basically a highly aerodynamic brick plummeting toward the open ocean. Now, commercial jets do have what's called a glide ratio, meaning they can trade altitude for distance, but they are absolutely not designed to operate as unpowered gliders for long. The sheer physics involved in keeping this massive, heavy metal cylinder in the sky without engines pushing it forward are staggering. The stakes literally do not get any higher. And to understand how this specific plane stayed up, we have to look at a completely fascinating and honestly deeply disturbing chain of events.
And we have to remember the massive human toll at risk right out of the gate here. 306 passengers and crew members were trapped in the dark on August 24, 2001. This was an overnight red-eye flight heading from Toronto to Portugal. Just picture the scene. People are wrapped up in blankets, leaning against the windows, maybe reading a book under that tiny overhead light, completely oblivious that a massive crisis is quietly unfolding right beneath their feet. It's that stark contrast, right, between the peaceful, routine vibe of the cabin and the imminent mechanical catastrophe that makes this whole story so chilling.
Section 1. A ticking time bomb, 9 days earlier.
To really get to the bottom of this midair nightmare, we've got to jump backward in time. Because the root of this crisis didn't actually start in the sky. It started on the ground. 9 days prior to the flight, the maintenance team found metal shavings in the right engine's oil system. Now, in aviation, that is a huge red flag, indicating a severe internal problem. So they decided they had to replace the entire engine. But, as you might guess, grounded planes cost airlines crazy amounts of money every single day. It creates logistical nightmares and insane deadline pressure. So to get the plane back in the air quickly, they leased a replacement engine. Here's the catch, though. The leased engine was an older design, and they were attempting to install it onto the plane's much newer, updated internal hydraulic and fuel systems.
It was literally like trying to plug a new phone into an old charger. The parts just weren't meant to talk to each other. Specifically, a hydraulic pump on that older replacement engine didn't have the exact physical clearance required to fit the newer setup on the airframe. The brackets didn't align, the spatial tolerances were completely off, and look, when you force incompatible technology together, especially in the super high-stakes, precision world of aviation engineering, the result is inevitably catastrophic. So the technicians needed to check the official digital repair manual to see if a workaround was even authorized, but the airline's IT network was down. The manual was completely offline. Squeezed by that intense deadline pressure to get this plane flying, a technician improvised. They created what engineers call an interference fit, basically jamming mismatched hydraulic and fuel tubes close together, completely violating strict manufacturer design rules. Over the next 9 days and across several flights, those forced metal tubes sat way too close to each other. As the jet engines vibrated violently at 30,000 feet, those metal lines rubbed and rubbed, slowly and inevitably sawing a tiny hidden hole into a highly pressurized fuel line. The trap was officially set.
Section 2. The fatal cockpit mistake.
All right, let's jump forward to the night of August 24th. The plane's out over the ocean, and fuel is slowly, silently leaking from that tiny hidden hole under the right wing. At 5:33 a.m., a warning light flashes in the cockpit. Fuel imbalance. Basically, one wing tank is draining a lot faster than the other. Now, the official safety checklist mandates very specific diagnostic steps for this. But here's the thing. False sensor readings are actually a pretty common annoyance in modern aviation. Human psychology in the cockpit naturally leans toward assuming, oh, it's just a computer glitch, before jumping to the conclusion of, wow, we have a massive, impossible fuel leak. Trusting their gut and past experience over the rigid checklist, the crew assumes it's just a routing error. Thinking they simply need to balance the fuel tanks to fix this glitch, they make a fateful decision. They open the crossfeed valve.
Now, the crossfeed valve is normally a brilliant piece of engineering. Its entire purpose is to save an aircraft. It lets pilots route fuel from a working tank over to a working engine if another system fails. But in this specific scenario,
Opening that valve had a completely devastating consequence. The pilots inadvertently took the precious, life-saving fuel from their perfectly good, intact left tank and actively pumped it directly over to the leaking right side. They essentially used a life-saving protocol to bleed out the aircraft's life source, sending all their remaining fuel pouring straight out into the pitch-black Atlantic Ocean. And there is a deeply tragic irony layered into all of this. Back in 1997, a remarkably similar fuel leak incident happened on a different flight. After that near miss, aviation investigators strongly recommended that planes be fitted with an automatic leak warning system. It was a software update that would actively compare fuel flow rates and explicitly tell a crew, hey, you have a leak, instead of just, you have an imbalance. But because of bureaucracy, slow rollouts, and cost, that system was never installed on Flight 236. If they'd had it, the crew would have instantly known the horrifying truth, kept that crossfeed valve shut, and easily had enough fuel to land safely.
Section 3. 19 minutes of glide.
The momentum from that first warning is absolutely relentless. At 5:33 a.m., they get the imbalance alert. For 40 agonizing minutes, the crew is frantically trying to troubleshoot this glitch while fuel is just spraying into the night. Then, at 6:13 a.m., the right engine stutters, starves of fuel, and dies completely. The shock in the cockpit is absolute. They are now flying on one engine over the middle of the ocean. But the nightmare isn't over. Just 13 minutes later, at 6:26 a.m., the left engine dies. Total power failure. The main generators spool down, the cabin goes completely dark. A massive commercial jet has instantly become an unpowered glider, accompanied only by the roar of the wind outside.
At the exact moment they lose all thrust, they are 144 kilometers away from the absolute closest stretch of tarmac, a Portuguese military air base in the Azores called Lajes. Now remember that glide ratio we talked about? An Airbus A330 has a ratio of roughly 15:1. That means for every 1,000 feet of altitude they drop, they can travel 15,000 feet forward. Plummeting at a terrifying vertical descent rate of about 2,000 feet per minute, the pilots quickly ran the frantic mental math. Could they stretch their remaining altitude to cover 144 horizontal kilometers of open ocean? It was going to be excruciatingly, impossibly close.
If they fell short of that military runway by even a single mile, the alternative was a water ditching. And landing a 200-ton plane in the Atlantic Ocean is extraordinarily perilous, even on a calm day in broad daylight. In pitch-black darkness, with ocean swells and absolutely zero visual references to judge your altitude before hitting the water, a structural breakup of the plane is practically guaranteed. Inside the cabin, the terror was palpable, yet completely quiet. The flight attendants instructed everyone to brace, and in a moment of just deeply haunting human realization, one passenger simply turned to his wife in the dark and told her that they needed to put on their shoes. He was holding on to this desperate, slim hope that if they actually survived the violent impact with the freezing water, they would need to be able to swim and climb out.
Section 4. Anatomy of a miracle. Then at exactly 6:45 a.m., the pilots achieved the unthinkable. They navigated this massive glider right to the threshold of the military runway. But here's the catch. Because they had no engine power, they had no thrust reversers to slow the heavy jet down once they touched down, and many of their hydraulic flaps were severely limited. So they had to come in incredibly fast and heavy, at over 200 knots, which is way above normal landing speeds. They basically slammed the plane onto the tarmac. It was a violently hard landing. The extreme braking actually melted the landing gear. Tires blew out entirely, sending massive sparks flying into the dawn air. But the plane stayed on the runway. It stopped. It was a record-breaking 19-minute glide that successfully saved all 306 lives aboard. 0 casualties. Absolutely incredible.
You know, aviation experts and engineers across almost all complex industries often refer to scenarios exactly like this using the Swiss cheese model of disaster. It proves that massive catastrophes almost never happen because of one single isolated mistake. Instead, imagine slices of Swiss cheese stacked together. The holes are the flaws. Here, you had a maintenance shortcut driven by financial pressure. You had an IT failure with an offline digital manual. You had human psychology leading to a procedural error in the cockpit. And you had a bureaucratic delay causing a missing automatic safety system. Any single one of those slices could have stopped the disaster. But on August 24, the holes perfectly aligned, allowing the hazard to pass straight through every single layer of defense.
Which really leaves us with a profound thought to carry into our own daily lives. Think about all the invisible safety nets, the complex technologies, and the intricate systems you rely on every single day, from the car you drive to the servers hosting your data. When those overlapping systems fail, and human errors compound in the heat of the moment, what really is the fine line between a devastating disaster and a miraculous save? Often, it simply comes down to human resilience and sheer courage when the alarms stop and the silence sets in. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this incredible story. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.